Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new ProRevenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "This is what we did to Randy." A few decades ago, I was serving in the Navy, stationed at Naval Training Center to do some schooling. We were all young there, 18 to 20. And everyone had been in the Navy about a year at most. A few of us did drugs. Not a lot, just dropped acid once a month or so, usually off base. Being in a strange place, LSD was tough to get sometimes. We were all cool and kept it quiet. We were all decent students, good friends, and everyone there looked out for one another. Then there was Redneck Randy. Randy was from a small southern town where his unusual surname family were moderately well off and very well known. Coming from being a big fish in a small pond, Randy was entitled. I mean, entitled to the point of being a sociopath. Constantly borrowing money without repaying it. Copying everyone's notes for class. Getting duty switched around to favor his plans. He even double parked his giant pickup truck in the base parking lot. Just greater douchebaggery. Cripes, he even bragged to me one time that his grandfather was ex-Klan. I ain't ashamed to say my granddaddy wore a sheet. Well, after a few months, Randy stopped going to class. He was still in the barracks, but he never mustered for school or marched to class with us. When asked about it, Randy said he'd been moved to an elevated program elsewhere on base, working on a project for the Navy. We all just assumed he'd entitled himself into another gig. Which he had. You see, Randy had become a NARC. Around this time, he also suddenly began talking about drugs. Not sell me drugs kind of talk, more like how many drugs he'd done in his life. How many piss tests he'd cheated. How easy it is to get away with drug use. That kind of thing. We realized later he'd been laying the groundwork for insinuating himself into the circles of those who did do drugs, a group he never really associated with. Except to borrow money or notes. After a few weeks of this, he had himself a fish, my roomie. Roomie told me Randy had met a guy in another barracks who sold a bit of acid, and would be willing to part with a sheet, if we'd keep it quiet. Randy had bought from this guy many times and swore he was legit. Although we avoided Randy, he kept pestering Roomie into buying until Roomie said okay. Roomie went to go meet the dealer one day after class and wound up in handcuffs. If I hadn't had duty that day, I'd have been in handcuffs, too. We quickly put the pieces together. Skipping class, he's talking about drugs, him pressuring us to buy. Randy even swore his roommate to secrecy and admitted he had done this to avoid a bad conduct discharge. He'd been caught with cocaine and talked the base police into working as a NARC to lessen his punishment. His roommate told us this and informed us Randy was getting discharged in a week, himself. Why did his roommate tell us? Fucking Randy had casually offered to turn him onto some stuff a month earlier. And his roommate didn't even use. Randy just needed a victim, and anyone would do. On the day Randy was supposed to get discharged, he parked his truck next to the barracks. Too lazy to carry his stuff all the way around to the lot. He'd toss his stuff out the window and walk around the barracks to pick it up and put it in the truck. I watched him toss 2 sea bags outside from my window, 2 doors down. When I heard the door slam, I jumped out the window and threw them into my room. By the time Randy got around the building, his stuff was gone. If the story stopped here, it would have been posted in r/ProRevenge. But it doesn't. You see, later that night, when Randy was driving back home, we opened his sea bags. Aside from a CD player and a case full of Led Zeppelin 400s, the sea bags were mostly clothes. Mixed in with those clothes, though, were Randy's discharge papers, including his DD 214. Underneath those, we found Randy's address book and, I shit you not, a phone book from his county down south. It didn't take long for the 4 of us to formulate the plan. Our fury at Randy was the fuel that ran the engine of our retribution. We called everyone in the address book and told them what Randy had done. His parents, his siblings, his aunts, uncles, and cousins all got a call. We called former employers and old friends of his. About half of the numbers were girls in town. Randy was quite the ladies' man. They all got a call. We had Xeroxed his DD 214 and arrest report and offered to send a copy to anyone who didn't believe us. Only 4 took us up on it. His family members and former employers got a copy anyways. The only people we spared were his grandparents. That was the address book. From there we moved on to the white pages. Almost everybody with unusual surname in the county got a call. We typed up the story at the base library and made about 70 to 80 copies. They, along with copies of the DD-214 and arrest report, got sent out to any business in town with unusual surname, as well as any business we thought might be associated with Randy's family. Hell, we even sent a few copies to some businesses we saw were next to unusual surname business. Every law firm in town got a copy, as did the local paper. 3 people on Randy's street got a copy. For the grand finale, we called the local police department, pretended to be base police and informed them of the incident, reminding them he would be returning to their area in a few days. They got a copy of the arrest report DD-214 too, of course. When all was said and done, we made about 60 calls and sent out about 70 copies to the people and businesses of Randy's small southern county. We had a dozen or so copies left, so I mailed them to Randy himself over the course of 6 months, one every few weeks. I mailed the last one the day I left for my ship. Naturally, all those telephone calls and postage got to be kind of expensive. Luckily I had plenty of money from selling Randy's CD player to a guy 3 barracks over. The CDs were thrown away. I hate Led Zeppelin. The next one is titled, Same, but Different. When I was married, I tried to make it work. My ex will have a different story, of course, but my conscience is clean. I worked my butt off so we could get out of debt. I was there for her brother and sister when stepdad would go on a bender and hulk out when his frustrations got the best of him. I never hit her, and I never cheated on her. I really, truly tried to make it work. My ex had cheated on me once before, but I sincerely believe that people can change if they really want to. She was profusely and abjectly sorry, and promised to never do it again. I took her apology at face value, and life went on. I never brought it up again, not even in our worst arguments. But, having been burned, I remained vigilant. We had moved in with her mum to help out with her family's medical bills but moved out when those were under control. And we were finally able to get ahead just a little. We had a little bit of disposable income, and a little bit more free time for ourselves. 4 years into our marriage, I noticed that she was going out a lot with friends. Work was demanding more of her time. She was coming home later and later. She was skipping out on eating our meals together. Classic signs. I finally confronted her. One day, she told me she was going out with friends. Again. I said it was fine. When her friends came to pick her up, I told her I wanted to meet them. Oh, we have to be somewhere at this time and we'll just make it if we leave now. I consider myself pretty laid back, but I took a hard line this time. You're not going anywhere until I meet them. She knows she's caught. She goes out the door, and comes back with one guy. My heart rate shoots up, and I try to keep my rage under control. My dad was an old school soldier, and he taught us discipline. You learn discipline real fast when screwing up means you get the belt. I have both of them sit down, she can't even look at me. I straight up ask, are you her boyfriend? Is she your girlfriend? Guy has a smirk sneer on his face. What do you think? You know that saying, seeing red? It's true. I saw red. I wanted to get my machete and go to town. But discipline. You are better than they are. I control my breathing, take a deep cleansing breath. My voice is shaky. I point to her. You, woman, if this is how you treat our marriage, then I want nothing to do with you. I point to the guy. You. If she can do this to her husband, guess what she's going to do to you? I point to the door. Both of you may now leave. The guy drops the smirk off his face because he sees something in mine and both get up and scramble for the door. Right before it shuts I can hear her yelling at him about how close he came to dying. I hear the car peel out a few seconds later. I lock the door and collapse down against it. Less than emotions ensue. Greater than that night, she calls me up. She's getting her stuff and getting the duck out of my life. I'm still messed up, so I say yes. I tell her I'll even stay out while she does this. Fine, she says. The next day, I go out and do stuff. Then I go do more stuff just to do stuff. When I get home, she's taken her stuff. She's also taken a ton's worth of my stuff. Stuff that was sentimental to me but not to her, just to deny me that little bit more happiness. That's not right, that's just rubbing it in with a rake. I'm stone cold sober now, and I begin to plan. It takes a week, but end result, I take her car. First person I called immediately after I got home was her mum. I told Mill that we, her daughter and I, couldn't be together anymore. Mill tries to get more information, but I tell her to get it from her daughter and call me if she needs any more details. Mill is cussing up a storm, not directed at me, when I hang up. A couple of days later, I got a call from her brother who is 6 feet 1 inch and built like a brick house. This is the guy who told me that if I ever hurt his little sister he would melt my dead body in acid so no one would ever find it. Bro, I'm sorry about what happened. If you need anything, just call. My Mill has 10 siblings. She told all of them, and all of them were solidly behind me. Even the psycho aunt that nobody else in the family talked to. Her cousins, nieces, and nephews called me up to offer support. It was immensely gratifying. Karma. About a year later, I heard through a friend that boyfriend got her pregnant then dumped her. A year after that, heard she was pregnant again from a different guy who also dumped her. The next one is titled, They Messed With My Tree Fort. I rebooted the local economy and left them out of it. Background info, about 8 years ago, at my elementary school, there was a small forest in the back. For years kids had been building forts out of sticks, branches, and old lumber and pottery that the school chucked down there. Normally this would have been thrown away, but they realized that kids were learning and having fun, so they put potentially useful materials down there. By and large, it was a really cool place for a second grader to be. There was even an economy based off granite chunks and broken glass shards we found on the ground. These could be used to buy wood, pottery, branches, and other good building materials. The story, recently my friends and I had been working on a fort and it was actually looking pretty good by second grade standards. We stayed after school on Friday and finished the exterior, excited to come back on Monday and build some furniture, really just a couple logs we stacked. We also carved our initials into pieces of it with a sharp rock. This is important later. When Monday finally came around, we charged out of class as soon as the bell rung and ran down to our fort. Only to find it gone and in its place a piece of paper with "Losers don't deserve forts" written on it. I lost a piece of my innocence that day. The revenge, everyone who I built the fort with was irate, so we spent the rest of that break period asking people about the incident and looking around. Eventually one of my friends called us all over to a fort built by some third graders and wasted no time showing us his engraved initials. We had found them. At the time our granite glass supply was fairly low, so we couldn't just buy back our stuff. Also, we didn't want to. We would rather lose our stuff than pay the buttholes who took it. These guys were well-known dickheads even before this, so most of the fort community, including us, didn't like them already. I thought of telling a teacher, but shitty-looking initials was not a very strong proof that the stuff was ours. Even if they did believe us, they wouldn't actually punish the third graders who did it. If we were lucky we might get our stuff back, but nothing more would happen. Partially due to the fact that they were just third graders and were apparently still learning how to be kind. And partially due to the fact that my school gave super light punishments. The plan came to fruition as I was walking to the car from the baseball field after practice. The sidewalk was full of these really cool looking blue rocks and I was thinking I could use them as currency. I came back to school and showed my friends some of the rocks I had collected. They all thought the rocks looked great and one of them thought we could use them to get our stuff back from the third graders. We all thought this was a great idea, so I hand the friend that suggested it a few rocks. He walks up to the buttholes fort and made those rocks seem like solid gold. This guy is honestly going to be the world's greatest salesman. He sold the actual crap out those rocks. Within minutes we had our supplies back and most of the wood from their fort. The third graders were like my precious over a few blue rocks that I basically had thousands more of. Over the next few days we bought so much crap with those rocks that literally every fort group except the buttholes had about 50. Obviously we kept the lion's share and had a couple hundred buried below our fort, which was under construction. We watched with smug grins, as those third graders tried to buy stuff with the now worthless rocks and were turned away because of their comparative poverty. To round off this revenge we told everyone in a fort group what happened and how they stole our stuff. Most people had seen their fort grow over the weekend, so they believed our explanation. Also everything is just way more believable as a second grader. So if they tried that kind of crap again, the entire fort community would retaliate. Eventually they just stopped coming to the forest and hung out on the field instead. Lesson here, don't duck with other people's stuff. The last one is titled, They Blamed Me for Stealing, All I Did Was Prove Them Wrong. So after finishing a design program in school, I quit my temp job in financial services and started to focus on design. A couple of friends were at a small events company that also had their own TV show, a video game, and lifestyle TV show. And they needed someone to help out on the show and do some of the other design work around the studio so that they could focus on pre-production. Sounded amazing, so I went into their offices, sat with them for a chat and started the same day. At first, all was good. The boss seemed okay. He asked me to get a coffee with him, let's call him Drake, and kind of probed my background. I went to film school, worked as a camera assist and DOP for a while before switching my focus to motion design and 3D. This set off a light bulb in his head and had me doing pre-production on the show. I brought in a friend to help produce and everything went forward. I worked on the show for about a year and a half. The show itself was fun. I got flown to E3, PAX and pretty much every major local gaming and cosplay expo. Worked with a bunch of famous cosplayers and minor expo celebrities and had a great time doing it. But during all this, I saw Drake slowly push me, making jokes about me and the producer. Inappropriate comments about our personal lives. Angry outbursts for no real reason, the inability to reason or compromise, and later, saw how dodgy the business was. Getting quotes from suppliers and then in the middle of the project calling and demanding they lower their quote or not be paid. Making behind-the-scenes deals with sponsors of the show to take marketing budgets, put it into the show but then split the money with the marketing manager who made the deal. Taking prizes that were intended as giveaways for the show and just selling the product on eBay to line his pockets. All the while, I figured, I've been here a while, I see him burn people every day. But surely it won't happen to me. He owes me more than that. I'm making this show for him, did the title sequence, the graphics package, secured sponsors. Organized social media, shot the show, edited, mastered and delivered. Oh, how wrong I was. Things started getting worse, a bunch of big events were happening. And in addition to the show, I had to help out with the events work. I was burnt out but had a trip coming up, so had to stick it out until it was all paid for and over. I had already decided I was going to leave for my trip and not return to the company. In the weeks before my leave, the major event happened and during the event, something with some location audio went wrong. It didn't really have anything to do with me, but he grabbed me by the collar and told me if I didn't fix it he would kill me. That was my whoa moment. This guy is actually a sociopath. I figured I needed to take some precautions to protect myself as I still had a week until I'd be leaving and then I was out. I started by packing all of my gear at the studio and getting it out of there. Each day I'd stay back late and pack as much as I could. By this point, the whole show was operating on my equipment, my camera, my lenses, my sound equipment, my raids, my software licenses. So I got that all out. I then backed up every piece of correspondence I had from him. All my invoice emails, any requests in writing, any receipts, etc. I got my last invoice in, and let him know that I was off and would see him when I got back. Again, no plans of going back, but best to keep that from him until my invoices were paid out. On the day of my flight, he called me 5 or 6 times asking about footage from the major event. It was all stored on my drive but wasn't scheduled to be cut down until well after my return. This was an insurance policy. Technically I signed no contract with him, so I owned that footage. I called him and said it's not scheduled to be cut down yet, but it's on the server, knowing he wouldn't know how to check that anyway. A week into my trip, I sent an email asking why my invoices hadn't been paid yet. I had previously asked that they are prioritized given my holiday, and he agreed. I was met with an email from the troll he hired as an events coordinator, but really she was just the receptionist with a fancy title. She stated that there was an ongoing police investigation, as I had clearly robbed the office before leaving. All of the equipment was missing, drives, footage erased from the server, not true, etc. She included a police event number and said if I didn't return all equipment and pay the company $5,000, they would be pressing charges against me. I laughed and fired back that all of the missing equipment is mine, but I'm happy to look over any receipts they have for it. I immediately called the police and gave the officer the event number and asked what was going on. She explained that a woman, the office troll, came in and made claims that I had stolen from the business. but had no evidence and was advised she would need to provide proof, but never returned to do so. I told her about them, demanding I pay up $5,000 or they'd press charges. The police officer took a statement from me in case it went further, as this was a clear case of extortion. I just wanted out, and they were willing to go to these lengths to weasel me out of the money I earned killing myself for them? I was upset, to say the least. And I knew enough about their business to destroy them. Step 1. I immediately sent my unpaid invoices to a collections agency. They straight away fired off a letter of demand, which informed Drake of my desire to seek the unpaid invoices as well as legal costs should it come to that via the legal system. I got all of those backed up emails together that prove I was working on the days I invoiced them. And since my invoices are itemized by project, those emails should match with the specific projects I was working on. Step 2. I start hitting him where it hurts. For starters, their only software licenses were mine. Prior to my arrival, they were operating entirely on pirated software. I didn't touch any of their software while doing work for them. 3D was handled on my own machines. We started doing post in the Creative Cloud, and I left their pirated FCP licenses alone. So aside from uninstalling my own software and plugins from their machines, everything was back to the way it was before I left. So I reported his company to the BSA, the Software Alliance, and was surprised when I heard back immediately. Drake was running 5 or so edit suites with pirated copies of Creative Suite, FCP, Microsoft Office, Maya, 3ds Max, etc. A lot of expensive software. The guy who emailed me back asked if he could call me and basically told me that they often have no way of knowing if a company is using pirated software. So they really rely on tips such as mine to go after companies. I forwarded him emails where I had advised Drake that we needed a specific piece of software and the cost involved, and his responses where he would CC me in and ask the IT guy to pirate the software. This was pretty much all they needed to fully implicate Drake. The guy then asked me to let him know how many computers were in the office, and I provided him with a map of Drake's office, with locations for each computer and the server, and a list of all software on each machine. Really easy to get this, as I still had access to their servers and could remote into each computer. Step 3. I discredit the business. I put out some business reviews on Google so that people would know what kind of shady operation Drake is running. I filed a copyright claim against their show reel, since the entire reel was made up of projects I did for them and I never signed over those rights. I commandeered a web player service they were using to host and monetize the TV show and removed each episode and deleted the account. I took over their Twitter page and posted info about how the company would rip off clients. I emailed a couple of major games expos who he had partnered with for both the events and TV show and let them know about how he would regularly have me alter footage to make it appear as though he was delivering on contractual obligations. Comp in Twitch.tv logos to make it seem like he was live streaming events, add banners where there weren't any, etc. Minor things, but things these companies were paying him to do. I even adjusted the About Me part of the website. And it wasn't very flattering. Now I still had a friend working there, so was informed of every reaction. Every time he shouted my name in anger, I knew about it. The BSA fined him over $60,000. When Drake heard the news, he threw his iPhone against the glass wall in his office, smashing it. I received a very nice reward for turning him in. He held out on paying my invoices until the very end, sending threatening emails the whole time and demanding that I pay him money for the trouble I've put him through. It went to court. I didn't need to attend. I won the entirety of my invoices as well as the cost of taking him to court. He basically paid for me to sue him. That year was the last year for the show. Likely had trouble getting sponsors after I emailed all of them about the way he was selling prizes on eBay and sent them a link to his eBay store page. He also no longer had involvement in some of the major gaming expos he'd previously done events work for. Those two losses would have cost him a few $100,000 a year. The page on the website was up for months. When he found it, he again smashed his phone. This time though, he didn't have a glass wall to break, as he had to move out of the very nice office with water views to a small office in a strip mall. I think he was having financial difficulties. It was on this night that he drunk called me and threatened to kill me. I celebrated his call by deleting all of the footage I had taken of that major event. The budget for the event was over $1 million, and a lot of that footage was the only proof he had even done the event. 5 camera operators footage, crane footage, drone footage of the venue, all recorded sound from MICS, all gone. Knowing he'd never be able to get that back was great. Plus his threatening phone call along with the extortion attempts that were on file were enough to get a restraining order put out against him, and I cannot wait until he inevitably messes up and tries to do something again. Thanks for listening.